Well, now let's meet Lynton Paddick, who's a pest controller. Hello, Lynton.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, we were talking about bees the other day. We were talking about the fact that people can now have them in their backyard, and some people want them. But occasionally, when you've got a swarm in your backyard, it's a bit of an issue. It's a pest problem, and they call a pest controller like yourself. And normally, what do they do when someone has a swarm?
Traditionally, pest controllers get called out, and the only real option they usually have is to just dust them out to eliminate the bees.
Kill them.
Kill them, yeah. Kill the hive, even though there's no real reason to actually do it. That's just the first choice because it's the easiest way to deal with them.
And you didn't like doing that, killing hundreds, if not thousands, of bees?
Yeah, a lot of the times I just think it was absolutely senseless to stick a dusting probe into a bee swarm and then just dust and eliminate the whole lot. Killing them, it's never sat well with me and never sat well with the franchisees that we had as well. We've actually had guys actually refuse to do bee jobs because they just didn't see the sense in it.
Do you feel the same way about white ants or not?
No.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because bees give us something back, don't they? They pollinate flowers, and the flowers produce the fruit, and we eat the fruit, so they're our helpers.
They are. It really struck home with me, especially when I had one client who I actually rang up, and the first reaction was, "Oh, it's Lynton here from Jim's Pest Control," and the first thing she said is, "I don't want the bees killed." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm not actually going to kill the bees." I said, I'm actually going to see whether we can actually shift the whole swarm and hive that you've got there and relocate them to somewhere where it's safer and that.
Okay, how do you find a relocation place? Because we hear about dog rescue centres, and they've got the RSPCA. How do you take a hive of bees? You can't take them down to the RSPCA shelter, can you?
No, you can't. It all came about as I tried my first hand at catching my first swarm. And I had a few clients that were interested in bees, so I was able to move a few swarms onto them. I then got in contact with the Bee Society of South Australia and said, look, I'm a pest controller. I want to save bees. I want to try and catch these swarms, but I need somewhere to put them. And I think they thought it was quite strange that a pest controller was trying to do this, and they sort of brushed me off at the time. Thought, this guy doesn't really know what he's talking about.
Okay, so where do you take them now? Where do you take it? I mean, I know Peter Gerds told us, I think it was about a year or so ago. Peter probably can ring in and tell us if he's listening. But Peter had a swarm of bees near his house, and I can remember him saying he was concerned about this big swarm that was actually in his driveway. Now, if you turned up at Peter's place and you took that swarm, what do you do? Put it at the back of the car? How do you take it somewhere?
Yeah, they actually hang in mesh bags. We put a whole mesh bag over the top, and we actually seal them within the mesh bag. And providing the queens inside, they actually calm down. They're quite easy to transport that way.
And where do you take them?
We actually take them to beekeepers now because, as I said, first the Bee Society of South Australia didn't really understand what I was going on about. But I actually rang them up one day, and the vice president, and I said, okay, I've got a swarm of bees. Where would you like me to deliver them to? And she goes, okay, drop them off to my place. She didn't really have an understanding of what I was doing. So I actually dropped it off at her place that night, and she thought it was absolutely wonderful that the bees were all contained within the bag, and then she could deal with them and put them into a hive.
Put them into a hive. It's a great thing, Lynton, and I know that, Lynton, you had another life before you became a pest controller, and that was in growing fruit, wasn't it? Tomatoes are a fruit, aren't they?
Growing tomatoes, yeah.
So you grew tomatoes at Murray Bridge.
Yep.
And the drought forced you off the land.
Yeah.
So you have a sort of a love of nature. It's a funny job to get into, isn't it? Get forced off the land, then you become a pest controller, but you still have a great love of nature.
I do. It's just the way that the cards have gone and the area that I've chosen to go into. But I try to make, although I'm a pest controller, I'm still trying to make a difference to what I actually do.
It's great. And someone just said that they had a swarm of bees collected from their home 5 years ago. It cost them about $50. What does it cost if someone rings up and says they've got a swarm of bees?
Usually to relocate them, it's about $169.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's because you've got to collect the bees. What would happen if someone said, look, I don't want to save them, I just want you to kill them? Is it cheaper to kill them?
It is cheaper to kill them because we're not transporting around live bees to a beekeeper.
But do you carry the cost if someone says I want to kill them? What do you do in that situation?
If it's a swarm hanging up in a bush, we probably just collect them anyway.
You'd collect them anyway?
Yeah.
And then just say, don't charge them the extra, do you? What do you do?
Yeah, basically. Because at the end of the day, if the swarm is hanging on a bush, there's no reason why you can't actually collect them. If they're in a wall, however, then there's no option. You can't pull a wall apart to get some bees out. And usually, even if you pull off gyprock and that to get the honey and the honeycomb out of it, usually those types of collections aren't usually very successful. So
I'm talking to Lynton Paddick this morning, a pest controller who wants to relocate bees rather than kill them. I heard that there was a problem with bees, that their numbers were disappearing, and that there's diseases that are affecting them. What is the bee situation like? Because when I look in my garden at the moment, they seem to be everywhere.
Yeah, it's mainly overseas. They've got really big problems with bee numbers, and bee numbers dropping down a fair bit. And it was mainly because a lot of farmers are using chemicals which aren't friendly to bees, and it's just eliminating them at a fairly rapid rate. Whereas at least in this state, we've actually got a fairly healthy population. However, with the diseases that are around, if we get the diseases that they have overseas come into this state, then we will have problems. So.
Now, David wants to know, we had to have a swarm killed because they were in the inside of our chimney. Would you have been able to get them out if they're in a chimney? No. So the ones you're talking about are the ones that I was talking about before near Peter Gers's house, where they actually, you'll often see them. They'll land on a tree or something. Now, what causes that swarming? The queen flies and stops, does she, for a rest or something?
What it basically is you've got a main hive, and this time of year it tries to split and make two separate hives.
Right.
And the second hive will fly off with either an original queen or a new queen to form up another hive somewhere else. They'll form up on a tree because they'll then scout around to see if there's a good home that they can actually go and move into.
So when they're on the tree, that's just the transition. They're just sort of pulled in as a wayside stop, and they're going to look. And if they find a chimney in the area, and
or find something else, then they'll move into that area.
So a worker flies out and says, "Look, I found a chimney, I found an old shed, a cavity in a shed, or I found a hollow in a tree." Yep. So where do you get the ones that are? So you're capturing mainly those ones when they're in transition.
Yeah, when they're in transition, because quite often, because there's limited space available, because you've got possums, you've got birds, you've got a whole range of animals competing for the hollows and that they want. You'll get swarms just sit on a tree for 2 or 3 days because they've actually got nowhere else to go.
We're talking to Lynton Paddick this morning, who's a pest controller with a nice warm heart. Now, what about the beekeepers that you've been helping? Do they give you a bit of honey back, seeing you're going out of your way? Do you get a sort of tit for tat?
Usually I do. Every time I drop off a swarm, there's usually, that beekeepers are very proud of their honey they produce, and they usually say, "Oh, here's a little pot of my honey, try it, it's the best." I'm amazed at how good the honey is that is produced in Adelaide. I have a friend whose father is a Greek gentleman, moved out here from Greece, and he's always had his own hive, and he gave us a taste of his honey one day, and it does taste better than anything you'd ever buy in the shop, doesn't it? Yeah,
because
it does.
I suppose it's picking up all the flavours of all the things that are in the suburbs.
Yeah. No,
have you got a hive at home yourself or not?
I actually have a hive at home now because I've got some cherry trees in my front yard, and I've never had much luck with fruit coming off it. And it's because one of my clients said, because we've got bees in our yard, a hive there, we've had fruit every single year, like masses of fruit. So I turned and said this year, okay, well, I'll put a swarm in the hive that I've got, and then see if that's actually going to fertilise my trees. And
do you end up getting dressed up in all the gear and have the smoker and go out and do it all, or do you call in a professional?
No, I am the professional.
You do it yourself.
I do it myself.
So you can do home beekeeping is possible, because
it is possible.
I'm thinking about doing it because the more I hear about hives in the suburbs, the more I would like to do it. Do you know whether there's any? Did you have to go to the council or not?
You have to go to the council and get a permit, and I also recommend going to the Bee Society and just learning about bees and how they work.
And where do you live? Are you in local,
I live at Parafield Gardens, normal suburb.
Normal suburb, and you've got a hive in the backyard. Great. Jenny of Crafers has called in. Jenny, good morning.
Hello, Ian. I live at Crafers, and a few years ago I had a swarm of bees later in the day that were swarming around, and then they settled in a tree and on the ground. And I rang the council. They gave me the name of a couple of apiarists. I rang one, and the man came around with his gear, and over the period of a night he kept coming back.
Gosh.
And gathered the bees up and took them home, and then brought me back some honey.
Oh, that's lovely. But
It was.
But it was quite a complex process.
Well, yes, he came and saw them, and then he came with his equipment, and it was down the bottom of the garden. And as I say, through the night, every now and again, he'd just come back and see how they were going, and just gathering them all up. And yes, by morning, I think most of them were gone, and he may have come back the next day. I would have been at work, but just to gather up any stragglers.
All right. Well,
But, yes.
Jenny, have you thought about having a hive yourself or not?
Well, yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think it'd be wonderful, wouldn't it, to know that you've got the bees there to be able to pollinate all the fruit trees in your yard and to
That's
just
right.
give them a home.
No.
We've just had a text from Caitlin, who lives up in the hills, and she said she was driving bees at night in a car while they're in the back seat, contained in a tied garbage bag around a rubbish bin in which they'd swarmed, and then dropping the rubbish bin off in the hills as a bit of a hoot. It must be difficult, though, isn't it, when you're driving along Lynton and you can hear. I mean, you can hear them, can't you? They must be upset when you put them in a bag.
They usually are upset a little bit, but the trick is if the queen's inside the bag, they're actually quite calm. We actually often have stragglers on the outside of the bag, and they're usually quite calm to deal with. I can actually pick the bag up and handle it without even a bee suit on, because the bees on the outside are more concerned with the queen on the inside.
And John wants to know what you can do to get rid of hopper jumper ants. They're a bit of a problem in the hills, aren't they? The hopper.
Yeah.
You can't relocate them.
No, it's something you don't really want to relocate. Probably just call out a pest controller to deal with them.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lynton. It's been wonderful to hear you out there not killing but saving these beautiful bees. It's